heart of a forgotten town. Shrouded in mist and mystery lay the ancient Greenwood Cemetery. Its wrought iron gates stood as a silent sentinel to the past, their rusted bars twisted into grotesque shapes that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to approach. For decades, the cemetery had been abandoned, left to decay in the midst of an overgrown forest. A thick layer of ivy blanketed the headstones, and the once white mausoleums had turned a sickly shade of gray. The story of the Greenwood Cemetery was a dark and gruesome one. In the 19th century, a notorious serial killer known as the Butcher of Greenwood had preyed upon the innocent townsfolk, leaving a trail of blood and terror in his wake. It was said that he lured his victims into the cemetery, where he would butcher them and leave their mutilated bodies among the graves. The legend grew, and tales of ghostly apparitions and eerie occurrences became the stuff of whispered tales and hushed rumors. Those brave enough to enter the cemetery at night spoke of a heavy, oppressive atmosphere, as if the very air itself carried the weight of the souls that had been lost to the butcher's knife. It was a place where the living dared not tread, a place where the dead were said to roam. Sarah had grown up hearing the stories of the Greenwood Cemetery, tales passed down from generation to generation. She had always been a skeptic, dismissing the stories as mere superstition. But when she inherited her grandmother's old house, which happened to be just a stone's throw away from the cemetery, she couldn't help but be intrigued. One cold, moonless night, curiosity got the better of her. As the clock struck midnight, Sarah found herself standing before the imposing iron gates of the Greenwood Cemetery. The chill of the night air sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed aside her fear and stepped through the gate. The crunch of her footsteps on the gravel path echoed through the cemetery, the sound reverberating as if the very ground beneath her feet held secrets. The ivy-covered headstones loomed like spectral sentinels, and the ancient oak trees swayed in the breeze, casting eerie shadows that danced across the graves. As Sarah ventured deeper into the cemetery, the air grew thick and oppressive. The only light came from the flickering lantern she carried, which cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Her heartbeat quickened, and she could feel a presence, an unseen force that seemed to be watching her every move. She reached a small mausoleum that had a name etched into the stone: Eleanor Forsyth, 1827-1860. It was said that Eleanor had been one of the butcher's victims, and her restless spirit was rumored to haunt the cemetery. Sarah's lantern light flickered and went out, leaving her in complete darkness. Panic seized her, and she fumbled for her phone to use its flashlight. As the phone's light pierced the darkness, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the cemetery. It was a woman's voice, wailing in agony, and it seemed to come from all around. Sarah's heart raced as she shone the light around, but there was nothing to be seen. The voice continued, growing louder and more mournful.
"Help me, please help me."
The voice cried, sending chills down Sarah's spine. She knew she should run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The voice seemed to be coming from inside the mausoleum. Gathering her courage, she slowly approached the stone structure, the voice growing louder with each step. As she reached the mausoleum, the voice abruptly stopped. Sarah hesitated for a moment before pushing open the heavy stone door. Inside, the air was damp and frigid, and the walls were covered in eerie, luminescent moss. In the center of the room, A pale, ghostly figure stood, her translucent form radiating an otherworldly light. It was Eleanor Forsyth, her eyes filled with sorrow and terror. She whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Sarah was frozen with fear, but managed to stammer.
How can I help you?
Eleanor's spectral form seemed to shudder, and she pointed to a small, hidden compartment in the wall. Sarah cautiously reached inside and pulled out a small, ornate box. Inside the box was a blood-stained diary, its pages filled with the horrifying confessions of the Butcher of Greenwood. Eleanor's restless spirit had been trapped in the cemetery for decades, unable to move on until her story was told. With the diary in hand, Sarah vowed to share the gruesome tale with the world, to expose the butcher's crimes, and to finally set Eleanor's spirit free. As Sarah left the mausoleum, the oppressive atmosphere in the cemetery seemed to lift, and the ivy-covered headstones no longer felt like menacing sentinels. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a silvery light on the forgotten graves. Eleanor Forsyth's spirit was finally at peace, and the dark history of the Greenwood Cemetery could no longer haunt the living. But as Sarah turned to leave, she couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the cemetery held. The butcher's crimes may have been exposed, but the ancient graveyard still held many mysteries, waiting to be uncovered by those who dared to venture within its haunted confines.